Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. Let's get started. Which legal way is best to annoy your neighbors? Part 2. Obtaining a clipboard and making notes is not the best suggestion, but it is something you should do. Learn a little bit about their schedules and then simply stand outside or by the window and jot down some notes on a magnetic clipboard. Ensure that they're able to observe you performing this action. If they're speaking to you in person, you should have that clipboard close at hand and take notes, possibly scribbling furiously and randomly during the conversation. In response to their inquiry as to what you're doing, you should either provide a cryptic response that does not provide any specifics or state that you're working on your grocery list. Make sure they never see what you have written. Furthermore, you're not required to actually take notes. Do some doodles, play a game of tic-tac-toe, and figure out what you need to get done this week. However, you should always give the impression that you're taking notes on them. There's no law that prohibits writing on a clipboard, but it'll drive them completely insane. Consider doing whatever you can to make the situation worse if two neighbors are arguing with each other. Engage in activities that lead one neighbor to believe that the other is engaging in the same behavior and vice versa. I did this not too long ago. Taking advantage of a fantastic and perfect opportunity that presented itself was something that I did, which is something that I do very infrequently because I never do anything like this. As a result, one of the neighbors ended up moving, despite the fact that it was a real pain in the rear end that drove me absolutely insane. I never said a word about it. My landlord, who is a complete and utter jerk, and another of his tenants were the neighbors. The tenants did something that caused the landlord a great deal of annoyance. It was something that I felt as well. The landlord confronted the tenant in an aggressive manner, and the tenant's visiting relative, who is a hothead, took offense. This resulted in a heated argument which led to the landlord calling the police. In spite of this, nothing came of it. Having said that, I went and did something to the landlord that made it appear as though the tenant's irrational relative who was visiting was the one who did it. After approximately 1 month, the tenant moved out, and they had been living there for a number of years. Number of years ago, I had a neighbor who lived across the street from me who had a problem with the neighbors who lived next to us. The previous week, the teenagers who lived there had thrown a party, and during the course of the celebration, dozens of them threw food and bottles at houses that were located in the surrounding area. In spite of the fact that we were all upset about the party and the subsequent mob, the parents of the child expressed their regret and offered to pay for any damages that may have occurred. The woman who lived across the street continued to have a problem with that family, primarily due to the fact that she was racist and they were immigrants, and she retaliated in the most annoying way possible. The entire neighborhood went completely insane as a result of her leaving her leaf blower running in her backyard for more than 12 hours. No matter how many calls they received from our street and the streets that surrounded it throughout the day, the police did not take any action until after 9 o'clock at night. Despite the fact that we are still unsure of what she had in mind to achieve, we are relieved that she moved out the following few months. On the other hand, she dumped some really cool furniture on the curb. Whatever location she may be, I hope she is miserable. She deserves it. I remember that my previous neighbors would throw pool parties and play their stereo loudly at my bedroom window until 2 in the morning every single Friday. I also remember sitting there when they first moved in. We asked them to stop by 11 o'clock, which is required by law for them to do. It's not the case. The fact that I called the police was not enough to stop it, so I made the decision to take matters into my own hands. Considering that my children do not go to sleep after 6 o'clock in the morning, I would go outside at 6 o'clock in the morning and let them run wild and have screaming contests in the backyard close to their bedroom window, which, to the best of my knowledge, is not against any laws. On the weekends, after 3 weeks of this, they stopped being loud after 11 o'clock, so it was successful. The younger neighbor who lives next door to us is extremely annoying because they throw loud parties on a weekly basis. My wife's hatred for her grew exponentially over time, and one day she came up with the brilliant idea of blasting the mosquito tone through our speaker and pointing it at the wall. For those of you who were not in high school during the time that it was the trend, there was a period of time when a ringtone that was extremely high in frequency was used by teenagers. This was due to the fact that as people get older, they lose the ability to hear it. It kept teachers from taking their phones when it rang, at least in theory. In any case, my wife and I are not quite old enough to be able to hear it anymore, and we hear a guy on the other side of the wall yelling, "What is that?" Short time after that, the party came to an end. Be nice and friendly. Tell them you have a business opportunity they may well be interested in. You can't give them details, too busy, but they should turn up at this seminar thing to get all the details. Yup, Amway. Whether they actually go or are smart enough to steer clear, I guarantee they will avoid you like the plague after that and will go out of their way not to engage with you in any way. Because, as anyone who has experience of people suckered into Scamway knows, it doesn't matter what the subject is, within 2 minutes the conversation will be turned toward how effing great Amway is, and how you really ought to come along, it won't cost anything, and it's a great opportunity, etc., etc. Note, for F's sake, no matter what, do not ever be tempted into going to one of those Amway meetings yourself just to see what it's about. Fresh meat gets shredded. Calling the police is the single most annoying thing that can happen to difficult neighbors. Across the street, there was a group of people who were accompanied by 3 teenage boys who were riding motocross bikes and tearing up and down the street. There was also the time when I called the police back because they were playing rap music that was extremely loud and vulgar coming from a car that was parked in their driveway. Then there was the neighbor who kept 3 dogs that are constantly barking in their front yard throughout the entire night. Attending the rock band practice that the neighbor next door was holding in their garage was a lot of fun. The 2 occasions when my neighbor invited a large group of middle school boys over for a party and then decided to let them loose on our neighborhood at night were my favorites. As I watched them swing from our trees and bound through our yards, I couldn't help but be captivated by their action. The most enjoyable part was sitting on my front porch after I had called the police and watching the boys walk back to the house in a manner that was orderly and quiet, with their heads hanging down because the police had just given them a new one to chew on. Observing irate neighbors arguing with the police rather than me about their dogs barking, for example, is also strangely satisfying. As a result, the issue is resolved and the neighbors are never informed of who reported it. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, won't you be my neighbor? Have you ever been involved in / watch the overthrow of a horrible HOA board? Tell your story, part 2. It's becoming clear very quickly that our HOA is a nightmare. The neighbors we've become friendly with all say bad things about them. From money scams to power trips, you can't have a pool above ground. 2 people do have them. It was 14 feet long, so we put it up. Not had any trouble. After 4 months of living here, we had a party to welcome our new home. The next day, we got a violation notice. Anyway, everyone says they're not serious, and by the time we get a 3rd notice fine, summer's over. We were never told about the HOA or given a copy of the rules. My wife sent an email to the board president, and 2 weeks later we got a letter with a copy of the section about pools. Yeah, that's cool, but I asked for a copy of all the rules. It's illegal to park on the street the wrong way, and it's also illegal for the grass to be too tall. Our neighbor behind us was great, but she was fired for stealing money. There are 2 cops in my neighborhood. He keeps a boat and 2 jet skis in a shed that's bigger than his house. Those aren't allowed, but he is. That's great. The other person had his driveway widened so that he could park his double axle on the side of the house. It's also against the law, but they can do whatever the F they want. When we asked when the next meeting was, they didn't answer. You can't fish in our lake, but you can rent boats and go on them. It's not cleaned very well. The neighborhood asked to have the HOA disbanded. No, the laws say it has to last for at least 100 years. WTF? Then we set up an HOA meeting with our neighbors and invited the board members. With every vote, the board was changed. Right away, a new board was chosen. The first thing the new board did was decide to get rid of the HOA. That's it. Oh man, I have the HOA from age. So I moved into this condo that I owned and that had a homeowners association. The location is in a state of disrepair, but it possesses a great deal of potential. The homeowners association was essentially a money pit that did nothing at all to serve the benefit of the community. After some time, he was taken into custody on charges of embezzlement, and we decided to hire a different property manager. Everyone had a lot of optimism. After becoming president of the HOA, the new guy in charge of managing the place promised us significant changes. For the purpose of initiating projects with a greater amount of funds, our HOA fees were increased. That's what we believed. Due to the fact that nobody wanted the last guy to get his money, the majority of the units were behind on their payments. Of course, it was reasonable for the new guy to request that everyone pay the fees. We made a request to be included in a payment plan, and our request was granted. This, however, marked the beginning of the downward spiral that was to follow. After a few months had passed, we began to receive strange advertisements in the mail promising to buy our property for cash, followed by advertisements for real estate attorneys with similar claims. As a result of this, we decided to conduct some research, and we found out that our house was going to be foreclosed upon in a period of time that was less than a week. We went into a panic. In no way had we been given any kind of notice, so we obtained a loan, paid a retainer of $5,000 to a lawyer, and paid the back fees in full on the loan. This prevented conflict with Billy, who is the new president and manager of the HOA. Sadly, one of our neighbors did not fare as well. Due to the fact that he was an elderly and sickly man, he did not become aware of his foreclosure until it was already too late. Taking his toothbrush with him, he left. Found out today that when his home foreclosed, Billy put the home on short sale and sold it to himself for $100. He did this with UGFF reigned. We bring this to his attention, and he said it'd be a priority on projects. After some time had passed, roughly 6 months later, he ordered his men to set up a tarp. This was promptly destroyed by the subsequent Storm 766 in a short amount of time. We continued to make efforts to find a solution to this problem. However, Billy refused to provide us with his various contact details. When we sent our dudes to the post office, that was the only way to get in touch with him. This leak progressed to where we now have no ceiling in our living room because of water damage, and it's still leaking 4 years later. While this was going on, Billy continued his conflict with us. It was several times that he began towing our vehicles, claiming they had been abandoned. He sent us a bill for property damage, but he did not give any information about what the damage was for. However, he included a strong warning with a fine, stating that he would place a lien against the house if it was not paid immediately. We were obligated to make the payment. That's $500. A number of additional fees were imposed on us from left to right. They were fines for not attending meetings that we were never informed about, as well as fines for not replacing our fence, which was the responsibility of the HOA, but no one was doing it. The sum of each fine ranged from $100 to $500. It was his assumption that he was doing everything in his power to convince us to leave so that he could purchase our property. A homeowner with more financial means eventually hired an attorney, had a demand letter sent to Billy, and house records were released. We were finally successful in terminating Billy's employment last week. As a result of the fact that we never provide notice of meetings, this has proven to be a significant challenge because it's been difficult to gather all of the homeowners together. It was revealed to us that Billy had been using his own guys to landscape, which never actually occurred, and do repairs after he was fired from his position. As a result, he had been using funds from the HOA to pay for these services for himself. This is a significant amount of money. Spending $5,000 annually on landscaping and tens of thousands of dollars on repairs and trash disposal? in order to modernize the house he had foreclosed on and sold to himself for $100. In addition to this, his management fees per month amounted to approximately $1,000, the back fees that we had to pay in order to get out of the foreclosure, into his pocket without any delay. The HOA account was not affected in any way. The accounts were examined the day after Billy was terminated from his position. Insurance hasn't been paid in months and we were dropped. Then we, as a new community-run HOA, went to the bank. He had completely emptied the HOA account, unsure of the amount, I think my neighbor said about $16K. We immediately filed a report with the police. Embezzlement and misappropriation of funds are accusations that are currently being investigated against him. Thankfully, we have a substantial amount of evidence. In addition, we intend to make a legal complaint. What's the most lovely part? This month, he has not paid his obligations to the HOA. They've assessed him a late fee. We're going to place a lien on his property if he does not pay by the end of the following month. Eat that, Billy. If you want to watch the part 1, click the link here. We're very, very glad to see you all in the comments again. Many thanks for your support.